So the camera tracker inside of After Effects is pretty sweet, it's pretty powerful, and a lot of times it can do a perfectly serviceable job. The only downside with the camera tracker is that with easiness comes a lack of control. And if the tracker fails to get a usable track, a lot of times there's not much you can do. So, of course, there are other apps out there that are designed specifically for match moving, and in this bonus lesson, I'm going to show you one of them, Syntheyes. Syntheyes is one of the most popular third-party camera trackers out there. It's incredibly fast, really powerful. It has lots and lots of bells and whistles that the After Effects tracker does not, and I'm just going to walk you through tracking one shot so you can see what it looks like when you're inside of a third-party app and why you may eventually want to learn something like this if you're doing a lot of match moving. All right, here we are. This is the Syntheyes interface, and I'm just going to start playing this shot down for you, and you're seeing a whole bunch of crazy stuff going on here. All right, so let's talk about what we're looking at. So just like in After Effects, when you track a camera, Syntheyes attempts to track a whole bunch of 2D points on your scene. All right, you can see a bunch of little pink dots. You see these green ones on the car, and I'm going to talk about all this stuff. But basically, it tracks as many points as it can. And one thing about Syntheyes, and I'll show you a little bit of this in this bonus lesson, one thing you need to know about it is that it's built for tracking cameras. So it's got all kinds of amazing features. It can smooth out trackers, it can filter them, it can automatically delete ones that aren't very good. And then one gigantic difference is that it can actually separate movement from the camera and from the car, okay? So as you see here, there is actually a little cylinder there that I've tracked onto the car. And if I go into my perspective view here, you can see, hopefully, this faint little grid. That's the ground plane that is lined up damn nigh perfectly with the road. And you can see that the car actually has this little cylinder tracked on there. So if you wanted to, I don't know, say attach some sort of CG jet engine to the back of this thing, it would be trivial. Also, Syntheyes does let you insert temp geometry. So these are actually 3D models that ship with Syntheyes. They're really just for testing things out and setting your scene scale. But they do give you a really good sense of, is my track working or is it not? And you can see how locked down this is, all right? The interface of Syntheyes is really, really optimized for this task. You can see that you have a 4-up view just like you have in Cinema 4D or any other 3D app. Now, After Effects has one as well, but it isn't as nice to move around. It doesn't show you the nulls and the trackers as easily. It doesn't give you as much information. And looking at this is actually what I love the most about Syntheyes, is if you get a good track, you can literally see the topology of the terrain. If you look at the shot, you can see that the road is kind of up a little higher than the surrounding grass. And if you look here, there's this little hill that dips down and kind of goes back up. And this kind of goes up here, down, and then back up. So it's doing a decent job of actually figuring out the true topology. If I wanted to go crazy and do a whole bunch of work, I could actually build geometry for the ground that includes the slope of the grass and things like that. I'm not going to do that. All right, so I want to give you a quick overview of how Syntheyes tracks and how it works, so you'll be able to see what the differences are between it and After Effects. All right, so I've re-imported an image sequence of this shot, and you can see down here that Syntheyes is actually caching those frames, which lets me play it in real time. The other thing that caching the frames does is it allows Syntheyes to track really, really scary fast. Now, one difference with Syntheyes and After Effects is that Syntheyes really does want you to do a little bit of work up front. This car is moving, and like Mark mentioned in the lesson, camera trackers generally want to assume that whatever's being tracked is still, and it's the camera that's moving. That's what allows the tracker to figure out the camera move. But this car is moving, and the tracker doesn't know that this is a car, and so it's going to track pixels that it shouldn't, and it's going to get a bad result. So there are tools in Syntheyes that make it really easy to fix this. So if I go to the Roto Masking tab, and I just set up a new rotomask here, kind of like that. And then I can just sort of jump ahead in time, maybe to there, and then I can sort of move around and scale this thing up and move it, right? And adjust it, you know, very much like you would in Mocha, and you can see that it's being keyframed, right? So as I move this around, and I've kind of dialed this in, it will eventually lock right onto that, stay on it. So I'm going to do a little bit of work to get this rotomask set up now. All right, so that task is done. You can see we've now got a little garbage mat around this thing. Next step is just click this big green auto button, and I want you to watch how quickly Syntheyes will track this entire shot. It's 215 frames, and it's already tracked and solved the scene. Looking at the error amount here, you can see it's not a good track. Okay, so the first thing that I usually do in these situations is I try to figure out, A, are there any really bad tracking marks? And so I'll just kind of scrub through like this, and I'll look for trackers that are clearly jumping or doing weird stuff, like this one here. All right, I'm going to delete that one. And an easy way, sort of an automatic way to do this, is to go up to your track menu up here, and you can say clean up trackers, and then this is one of the big differences between Syntheyes and After Effects. You've got this whole filtering system. And it will try to find bad trackers in your shot. So there are 122 trackers, and it's saying 49 of them have a very high error. So clearly something's wrong here. And so before I go any further, I kind of want to do an idiot check here. So looking at this, it guessed that the focal length of this shot is 192 millimeters. And that's just kind of silly. It's definitely not that, okay? Looking at this, I don't know, maybe it's a 50 millimeter lens, you know, there's kind of it feels a little wide angle to me, honestly. So what I'm going to do is go back to the first frame here, and I'm going to go to, I'm in my solver tab already, and I'm going to change the solving method from fixed unknown, and unknown means I don't know the lens's focal length, to fixed with an estimate. And that estimate, I'm just going to guess 50. And then I'm going to try tracking again. And we'll see if that gives us any more of a clean result. And then we can clean up from there. Okay, so much lower error. This time the focal length it's solved for is terrible. It's still bad, but we got a lower error. So let's see what we can do with this, and we can always fix this. Looking at the actual geometry up here, right? Look at how many trackers there are. It almost builds up a map of your scene. You can see that this does sort of resemble what's happening in the shot. You've got a camera moving more or less in a straight line. There's some weird jaggedness over here, right? And I can see this tracker here. Like, this is a good example. See how it's below the ground, right? And let's see if we can find that tracker on here. There it is, right? That's clearly a bad tracker. So let's delete that tracker. And then I'm going to refine this track and say go, okay? And now it's got a lower error value, and it's starting to look a lot cleaner here. Now the focal length is still completely off, so I'm gonna try setting this to something like 70 and refining it and seeing what happens. Okay, and now it solved it for a 35 millimeter lens. Okay, this is kind of how the process of tracking goes. It's a little bit of guesswork, it's a little bit of art, a little bit of science. What I'm seeing up here really does kind of resemble the shot, and so now let me show you another really awesome difference between Syntheyes and After Effects. In After Effects, let's say that I want to know where, I don't know, like some point on this road is in 3D space, right? Well, unless there's a tracker there, there's not really a surefire way for me to know that. But in Syntheyes, what I can do is I can add a new tracker here. And the tracker in Syntheyes is really, really great. And what I'm going to do is tell it to automatically add a new keyframe every 5 frames. And to smooth out my track every 5 frames. And now as I track, I'm kind of watching this window, and you see it's kind of getting off the track a little bit, but that's okay, it's pretty close. And sometimes with 3D tracking, close is good enough because it's just using these tracks as estimates anyway, right? So I've got a tracker there, maybe I'll put another one there, adjust it, track that until the end, close that one out. And you can see how quickly you're able to sort of build up a better scene here. And then I could go to this tracker and I could actually unlock it and then track backwards to get it to the end of the shot there. All right, close that one out. All right, and then maybe why don't we go do like one more at the end here, right? So I don't know, there's like this interesting little spot on the ground there, right? So I could track that. And that one didn't track very well. So let's come back and try that again and see what's going on here. So if I track forward, let's say, and I move forward, it kind of loses the track. And so what I may want to do is actually get in a little bit tighter there and expand this track region a little bit. And now it's tracking it better. Tracks it all the way out of the shot. I mean, this is one of the amazing things about Syntheyes is just how fast the tracker works. Okay, so now we've got more trackers in the scene. I can go to my solver and I can say go, refine, okay? And it didn't really increase the quality of the track, but now I just have extra points that I know where they are in 3D space. And now I can go to the clean up trackers function, and you can see that now there's only 9 high error trackers. So if I set this to like a lower value, like 30, yep, there's still only 9. So if I say fix, and then I refine the track again, now we are under 1 pixel. We have a great track, okay? So already, hopefully you can see that there's lots of amazing tools here. The next thing I want to do is I want to set the ground plane and the orientation of this scene. And in Syntheyes, it's actually pretty easy. What you do is you go to the coordinates, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 3 points that are on the ground plane. So this one, and this one are all on the ground plane. So I'm going to click this 3 button here, and I'm going to say remove existing constraints. And don't worry about what all this stuff means. This is really just supposed to show you the basics of how Syntheyes works. But now you can see that all of those points are now on the ground plane. If I change this to my perspective view and I turn on the shot, you can see that there's now a ground plane. This grid is showing me the ground plane, and everything's aligned pretty much perfectly. And I've got all these trackers, right? Lots and lots of information. I can also go into a quad perspective view, and I can adjust this if I want to. So, for example, right now, the way this scene is oriented feels a little bit backwards to me. So what I'm going to do is in this view here, this top view, I'm going to turn on whole. And what that's going to do is transform the entire scene, right? And I'm just going to rotate that camera so it's facing 0 degrees on X, and then I'm going to move it so it's roughly like this. And then I can sort of rotate it to kind of line up the motion path with this axis here, okay? And now if I go back to quad perspective, right, we're still lined up. I did screw up the alignment a little bit, so I can actually just kind of nudge it and fix that. And the other thing I can do too is I can make the world size smaller if I want to. If I go into the solver, so the world size is at 2,000, all right, which is pretty big. So if I set that to like 1,000, you can see now the trackers get a little bit smaller, and the grid actually gets a little bit closer together. I don't know if it's easy to tell that. All right, so now how do we check and make sure that this track is really, really working? Well, it looks like it's working. The grid is kind of lined up, but a good way to check is to put some geometry in the scene. And luckily, Syntheyes makes that really easy. So you've got a whole bunch of different sort of primitive objects here, and it's got some fun ones like the teapot. So I'm going to make a new teapot, and I'm just going to place it somewhere on this road. So I'm going to click once, and it's going to start making the teapot. It's got this weird interface, and then you click again to set the scale. And then I can rotate that teapot, I don't know, maybe like minus 45 degrees, and then I can move it, and you can see that it's moving in sort of context there. And so if we leave it there, and let me switch back to my perspective view, you can see that sticks right on there. And let me scoot that thing over a little bit. There we go. Another cool thing about Syntheyes is it gives you this really nifty view where you can see what the camera's doing, and it sort of shows you your shot almost like it's a window looking into the shot. Now, this is great if you're doing any kind of set extension. There's a lot of really cool features that this kind of thing lets you do. You can generate these really long clean plates if you want to. You can stabilize shots using this method. But at the very least, you can really tell that this track is rock solid. Now, the last thing, and I'm not going to show you this whole process because it is pretty tedious, but let me get rid of this for a little bit. Let's say I've got this camera track and I'm happy with it, but I want a track for the car as well. I want to be able to attach something to the car. So the way that works generally is, first you go to your shot and you need to add a moving object. So now this active tracker host, instead of being the camera, is going to be the object. And any new trackers that I add, for example, on this taillight, they will be tracked to the car. Now we're tracking forward, and I want to set keyframes every 5 frames and smooth every 5 frames. And you can see that it tracks essentially perfectly all the way to the end of the shot, and then I can come back here and I can track backwards. And I just need to get, generally I try to get at least 6 trackers. For something like this where there's not a ton of parallax between the trackers initially, I might try to get like 8 or something like that, and then you can come to the solver, and instead of solving for the camera, you can solve for the object. And having done that, this is what it looks like. And here it is, the tracked shot with the car tracked as an object. And this green diamond here, this is actually the sort of the null for the car. And I've essentially parented this cylinder to it. And you can see it locks in perfectly. And it's getting the distortion from the camera lens as we get closer. And I could export this to After Effects, to Cinema 4D, to really any app I want to. And I really have just scratched the surface of Syntheyes here, just sort of going through the menus. You can see there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of things it can do. Some are very, very advanced. This is used on feature films. And it's a pretty amazing tool that works great with Cinema 4D and After Effects. So that's it. And hopefully this bonus lesson just gave you a little bit more insight into the way a real specialized camera tracker works, why you may want to pick one up eventually, and what it can let you do. Good luck with your homework.